There are people who rise to the very peak of fame, applauded wherever they go, crowned as symbols of success. But behind the spotlight, their lives are anything but glamorous. Fame doesn't bring peace. Success doesn't protect them from physical scars or fractured minds. For years, they suffer in silence, slowly, relentlessly. And the most disturbing truth? The pain isn't always inflicted by others. Often, it's self-destruction. The stories you're about to hear aren't about red carpets or shining images on screen, but the dark, hidden corners of 15 Stars, where every move they make feels like a form of punishment against themselves. J.T. Johnson, a jazz trombone genius who slowly pushed himself into the abyss of isolation and despair. Once, the name J.J. Johnson carried undeniable weight across the jazz world. The sound of his trombone was razor-sharp and flawlessly precise, helping define the bebop era and permanently raising the bar for the instrument. His career stretched across decades, marked by collaborations with legendary figures, timeless recordings, and a pioneering influence no one could replace. On stage, he embodied total control and elegance, a musician who could command an entire band with just a few notes. That aura followed him offstage as well, convincing many that J.J. Johnson would always remain steady, strong, and unbreakable. But by the late 1980s, as he passed 60, that luminous life began to drift off course. Retirement quietly closed the doors of the great jazz stages, leaving behind a chilling emptiness. By the early 1990s, Johnson had retreated into isolation, appearing less and less, withdrawing from the very music world he once ruled. In 1995, a prostate cancer diagnosis struck like a brutal blow to an already fragile body and spirit. The fear of a slow, lingering death haunted him relentlessly. Alcohol soon took center stage, night after night, one drink after another, until his mind went numb and emotion faded away. Cigarettes were never far from his hand, smoke filling his small room day and night, bringing constant coughing and deep physical exhaustion. There were stretches when he locked himself inside his old recording studio for weeks at a time. Behind closed doors, dim light fell on familiar equipment as meals were skipped, sometimes replaced by nothing more than a sandwich or a few crackers every few days. Time crawled by in suffocating silence, broken only by shallow breaths and the stale scent of alcohol. J.J. Johnson had survived heroin addiction in his youth, but this descent was far darker. It wasn't sudden. It was slow, deliberate self-destruction, driven by long-term depression and crushing loneliness, spiraling without escape. By the late 1990s, his body began to revolt. Respiratory failure led to repeated hospitalizations, and each return home drained what little hope remained. By 2001, the mental pain had grown unbearable. After years of eroding himself with alcohol, cigarettes, and isolation, J.J. Johnson made his final decision with a gun. A jazz genius was gone, leaving behind not only an immense musical legacy, but a chilling reminder of how silently a life can collapse after reaching the very top. Dave Duerson, an NFL star who spiraled into a nightmare of brain trauma. Once the embodiment of strength and discipline, Duerson carved his name into professional football history, winning elite titles and commanding the defense as a natural leader. When the cheers faded, he appeared to transition smoothly, entering business as a sharp, resilient former athlete who seemed built to conquer life after the game. To the public, Dave Duerson was the blueprint of success, standing tall under the brutal pressures of top-level football. But by the mid-2000s, the foundation began to crack. Crushing headaches struck relentlessly, followed by sudden, frightening shifts in mood. The hundreds of violent head collisions he'd endured left invisible scars, slowly eroding his grip on himself. In his 40s and 50s, Duerson lived in constant volatility, prone to explosive rage, barely restrained, as if an unseen force kept pushing him toward the edge. After retiring from the NFL in 1993, his business ventures unraveled one by one. Financial stress mounted. Confidence slipped away. By 2009, a divorce shattered his personal life, splintering close relationships and filling his home with tension and silence. In fits of fury, he screamed, destroyed rooms with his bare hands, and bled from broken glass. Outbursts that weren't just anger, but warning signs of a mind losing its anchor. At times, Dursun flirted with danger through reckless impulses, speeding while his head throbbed, refusing seat belts, driving at night without lights, indifferent to the risks closing in around him. He rejected treatment, even as his memory and judgment declined. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy from years of repeated blows hijacked his emotions and warped his thoughts. Isolation deepened. Friends drifted away. Family grew exhausted. Board positions vanished. By the late 2000s, depression tightened its grip day by day. Dave Dursun knew he was slipping and couldn't stop it. In 2011, after years of internal collapse, he ended his life with a single gunshot to the chest, deliberately preserving his brain for medical research. A final haunting act from a man who once gave everything to the game and paid a devastating price. Chris Lighty. Chris Lighty, the hip-hop mogul who slowly burned himself out inside a storm of power, pressure, and expectation. Once hailed as one of the sharpest minds in American hip-hop, he rose from humble Bronx beginnings to build Violator, the management empire that shaped an entire era. With ruthless negotiation skills, laser-focused strategy, and unmatched influence, Lighty stood at the center of the industry, where a single decision from him could make or break a career. To the outside world, he embodied success, control, and unshakable strength. But around 2010, just past 40, the rhythm of his life began to fracture. Hip-hop was evolving at breakneck speed. Old business models crumbled. The weight of the industry pressed down hard on the head of Violator. Work never stopped. Contracts, meetings, phone calls stacked endlessly, bleeding into sleepless nights. His body was exhausted, yet the grind demanded more. There was no pause, no silence. At the same time, his personal life unraveled. A bitter divorce beginning in 2011 turned his home into a battlefield. Before the dust could settle, crushing tax debts, millions of dollars, came crashing in. The man who had escaped poverty and touched the peak now found himself dragged backward by cold numbers and legal threats. The sense of failure cut deep. To cope, Lighty pushed harder, working himself to the bone, then reaching for hard liquor as a brief escape after brutal days. Late nights blurred into early mornings, glass after glass meant to quiet a mind stretched too tight. Instead, it only deepened the damage. He slept a few hours, woke up foggy, barely ate, and dove straight back into chaos. As the pressure surpassed his limits, Chris began to disappear. Phones shut off. Messages ignored. He isolated himself from partners, friends, and allies. Meetings were missed. Trust fractured. Even long-standing relationships, like those with artists such as 50 Cent, grew tense and strained. His health deteriorated fast. Exhaustion, stress, and self-destructive habits eroded his stability, trapping him between a glorious past and an unbearable present, with no clear exit in sight. From 2010 to 2012, the spiral continued, each day chipping away at his strength, pushing him deeper into despair. And in 2012, after a devastating family argument, the relentless struggle came to a tragic end when Chris Lighty lost his life to a gunshot, leaving behind a legacy as powerful as it was heartbreaking. Nina Simone. Nina Simone, the high priestess of jazz, was a genius who slowly turned her pain inward, torturing herself through years of disorder and isolation. She possessed one of the most unmistakable voices of the 20th century, a sound that shattered boundaries by fusing jazz, blues, soul, and classical music into something entirely her own. On stage, she was not just a singer, but a formidable pianist and an unflinching voice for civil rights. Her protest songs didn't merely entertain, they confronted, forcing America to listen. She didn't just sing the truth, she weaponized it. Yet behind the brilliance, cracks began to form. By the late 1960s, even as her career still glowed, Nina Simone's inner world was unraveling. In 1967, after a tense performance, she collapsed in full view. In a moment of visible distress, she poured an entire box of brown powder over her head, desperately trying to even her skin tone, a disturbing act of self-soothing rooted in deep psychological pain. Her speech grew rambling, hallucinations emerged, and her grip on reality began to slip. Undiagnosed bipolar disorder, barely understood at the time, quietly took control of her emotions. By 1969, her marriage to Andy Stroud had collapsed. Feeling betrayed by American society and haunted by childhood trauma, such as being rejected from music school because of her skin color, her anger hardened into something permanent. Nina withdrew from the world. She isolated herself, left her daughter in Barbados, and severed ties with her family. Even when her father lay dying, she stayed away. After his funeral, alcohol became her refuge, dragging her further into self-destruction. As the 1970s began, her behavior grew increasingly erratic and self-harming. In Liberia, during a shopping trip, Nina suddenly stripped naked and danced wildly through the store, crashing into shelves, stumbling downstairs, no longer an act of rebellion, but a visible loss of control. In Casablanca, during a concert, rage exploded when she felt disrespected by the audience. She chased people with a knife, then slashed her own leg on stage, bringing the performance to a horrifying end. These moments devastated her reputation. Concerts collapsed, contracts were cancelled, and loved ones drifted away. Her daughter was left deeply wounded. Nina Simone became a woman in exile, drifting between European countries with no permanent home. Her body and spirit were exhausted. Over a decade, she was hospitalized countless times for self-inflicted injuries. Only in her final years, after proper diagnosis and treatment, did her life find a fragile sense of balance. Behind the legend stood a devastating truth: a woman of extraordinary power, slowly destroying herself through rage, loneliness, and wounds that never fully healed. Don Cornelius. Don Cornelius, the Soul Train television icon, slowly tortured himself through loneliness and relentless exhaustion. Once one of the most powerful faces on American TV, he was the creator and longtime host of Soul Train, a groundbreaking platform that celebrated Black music and launched countless artists onto national stages. With his calm presence, deep commanding voice, and unmistakable authority, Don Cornelius built a cultural institution that lasted for decades. Soul Train was more than entertainment, it was history. It made Don Cornelius a household name, placing him at the center of America's television spotlight. But by the late 1990s, as he passed 60, that light began to fade. In 1997, brain surgery for an aneurysm changed everything, leaving lasting physical and emotional damage. By 1998, crushing headaches returned, constant, severe, and unrelenting. Don Cornelius refused prescribed medication, choosing instead to endure the pain in silence. His Los Angeles mansion became a sealed refuge, cut off from the outside world. As the pain intensified, so did the mental pressure. His second divorce in 2001 tore open a deep emotional void. Loneliness took hold, especially as the entertainment industry moved on without him. New faces replaced old legends, and Don Cornelius withdrew. By 2003, he had nearly disappeared from social life altogether. He spent weeks locked inside, skipping meals, avoiding friends, and cutting off contact. Time slowed as he replayed old Soul Train episodes again and again, clinging to the echoes of his former glory. When the show officially ended in 2006, the sense of being forgotten became impossible to ignore. The man who once ruled the stage now faced unbearable silence. Depression settled in deeply and refused to let go. By 2008, troubling behavior surfaced. Don Cornelius drove alone late at night, headlights off, speeding down empty roads, quietly testing the edge between life and death. Near misses sparked brief fear, but not enough to stop him. His health deteriorated steadily. Years of isolation, untreated pain, and refusal of care pushed his body into crisis. He was hospitalized multiple times for exhaustion. His relationship with his children grew distant, strained by silence and a widening generational gap that built invisible walls between them. From the late 2000s into the early 2010s, Don Cornelius lived trapped in a spiral of despair, where past fame could no longer save his spirit. In 2012, after years of suffering alone and rejecting help, Don Cornelius was gone. He was found holding a gun. A television legend extinguished, leaving behind a haunting story of fading relevance, deep depression, and self-destruction when the stage lights finally went dark. Tina Turner. Tina Turner, the soul and stage queen who learned to survive unbearable pain in the shadows of her marriage. Once, her name alone could set arenas on fire. A thunderous voice, a hypnotic presence, and an energy that never seemed to run dry. Alongside Ike Turner, she built explosive performances that shook stadiums, topped charts, and crowned her an icon of soul and rock. On stage, Tina was pure strength, singing, dancing, pushing non-stop, making the world believe she was born for the spotlight. But by the late 1960s, as her career soared, her private life collapsed into darkness. The marriage that began in 1962 became a cycle of physical and emotional abuse. Every show ended not with celebration, but with fear, waiting, bracing, enduring. In 1968, after a brutal beating, Tina swallowed sleeping pills, desperate for an escape. She woke up in a hospital, body broken, mind numb. It didn't end the violence, but it marked the beginning of something darker, a period of silent self-punishment. Years of relentless touring pushed her beyond human limits. Before each show, staring into the mirror as makeup went on, the tension boiled inside her. Around 1970, Tina began scratching her own face with her nails, leaving small marks no one ever saw under the stage lights. It was her secret release, pain she could control. The music would start, the smile would appear, and everything looked flawless. By 1974, exhaustion took a harsher form. She forced herself through rehearsals until her feet bled, hour after hour, body shaking, sweat pouring. She fainted more than once, but rest was never an option. Pushing herself to the edge became a reminder that weakness was forbidden. The shows remained legendary, but the cost kept rising. Her body began to fail, joint pain, collapsing health, canceled performances. And inside, the wounds only grew deeper. In 1976, unable to endure any longer, Tina Turner walked away from Ike, nearly penniless, but alive. That escape ended the physical torment she inflicted on herself, yet the mental scars lingered for years, etched permanently by the brutal life she survived behind the blinding stage lights. Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor, the king of Hollywood comedy who nearly destroyed his own body by fire. Once, his very name made Hollywood uneasy because of the power he carried. He wasn't just a famous comedian, he revolutionized stand-up storytelling itself. With hit films and sold-out stages, Pryor's raw, fearless truths struck exactly what audiences craved. He rose to the absolute peak of fame, admired, untouchable, an entertainment icon no one could replace. From the outside, his life looked complete, overflowing with success. But by the late 1970s, after more than a decade of glory, a darker reality emerged. Fame came too fast and too hard, leaving behind a hollow void no applause could fill. By 1978, cocaine became his escape, quickly taking over his daily life. Childhood trauma resurfaced, colliding with the terror of losing his crown, pushing Pryor toward reckless, fate-challenging behavior. In 1979, he tore through Los Angeles freeways on motorcycles, no helmet, daring death again and again. Crashes and injuries became routine, nearly a dozen serious accidents, yet the thrill of standing on the edge kept pulling him back. Then came 1980. In a drug-fueled loss of control, Pryor poured gasoline over his body and set himself on fire. Flames tore across him, burning nearly 50% of his skin. He spent long, agonizing days in the hospital as Hollywood watched in shock. By 1981, the skin healed, but the chaos inside did not. Pryor raged, screamed, punched walls, shattering bones and swelling his hands, unchecked and unrestrained. It was as if physical pain could quiet the emptiness within. The consequences were brutal. Film projects delayed, his career stalled, his family fractured even further. His body, worn down by years of self-destruction, suffered lasting damage that later contributed to multiple sclerosis. Yet that devastating spiral became a turning point. When his body finally reached its limit, Pryor began to wake up. He entered rehab and returned to the stage changed, still brilliant, but scarred. Not just on his skin, but in his mind, forever reminding us that behind Hollywood shaking laughter was a long, silent, and brutal war with himself. Donny Hathaway. Donny Hathaway, the legendary soul voice who slowly locked himself inside a world of paranoid darkness. Once hailed as a rare gift, his voice could reach straight into the listener's heart with just a few lines. His music was tender yet powerful, standing shoulder to shoulder with the era's greatest moments. His duets with Roberta Flack shook the charts. Hathaway's name was everywhere. Critics praised him. He was seen as an icon of raw talent and emotional depth. On the surface, his career was racing forward, leaving no room to slow down. But beginning in 1972, behind the bright stage lights, tragedy began unfolding in silence. Hathaway slipped into a spiral of self-torture. As his career peaked under relentless pressure, he subjected himself to prolonged fasting. His body grew thinner, his voice weakened, yet he forced himself to endure, believing suffering kept his mind sharp amid the growing chaos inside. By 1973, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and soon after, his delusions became more vivid. The crushing demands of the music industry collided with his mental illness, leaving him convinced he was being watched, manipulated by unseen forces. In 1974 in New York City, Hathaway locked himself inside a hotel room for days. The phone went unanswered. The door stayed sealed. Friends and colleagues called endlessly, hearing nothing back. A major performance was missed without explanation, leaving his team confused and alarmed. It became clear he was retreating from the world, choosing isolation as a form of punishment. By 1977, the self-torture was impossible to ignore. Lost in delusion, Hathaway took scissors to his hair, hacking at it unevenly as clumps fell to the studio floor. His arms bore visible scratch marks. His health deteriorated rapidly. Psychiatric hospitalizations followed. Albums were delayed. His career stalled. His spirit fractured further. Those years of self-destruction pulled Donny Hathaway deeper into the abyss. By 1979, his body and mind could no longer endure. The darkness finally claimed him, his life ending at the base of a 15-story building, leaving behind shock, unanswered questions, and a legacy forever marked by brilliance and heartbreak. Al Green. Al Green, the soul-singing pastor who punished himself through brutal self-denial. Once, his name shook the soul charts. A voice both gentle and powerful. Love songs that hooked listeners from the very first note. A polished image framed by big stages and blinding lights. Hit after hit dominated the radio. For years, he stood as an untouchable American soul icon. Success came fast. Tours sold out. Fame spread everywhere. But beneath the glory, another journey was unfolding, quiet, hidden, and far more unforgiving. It was a path Al Green forced upon himself. A life of severe endurance, while the public saw only a star at his peak. By the mid-1970s, the rhythm broke. In 1974, a violent act fueled by jealousy left Al Green severely burned, scarring both his body and his spirit. The shock shattered him. It pushed him into a deep spiritual crisis. He walked away from his old life and turned fully toward faith. But religion did not bring immediate peace. Instead, it ignited a cycle of relentless self-punishment. From 1975 on, Al Green threw himself into preaching as if trying to drain his strength completely. Sermons stretched for hours. His voice shook. His body trembled. Yet he refused to stop, as though every breath was payment for his past. By 1978, the intensity grew extreme. Sermons lasted up to 5 hours without water. Sleepless nights became routine. He forced himself into constant prayer, treating exhaustion as a test of worth. His body weakened. His mind blurred. Still he pushed on. To the outside world, he was a devoted pastor. Inside, he was slowly wearing himself away. By 1980, during scattered tours, the discipline turned harsher. Food was cut to the bare minimum. Days of fasting became normal. Water and dry bread were all he allowed himself, believing suffering was purification. The weight dropped fast. Crushing headaches followed. Severe dehydration sent him to the hospital. The consequences were undeniable. His stamina collapsed. His singing became unstable. Music projects faded. New albums arrived sporadically, if at all. Yet in the depths of exhaustion, something shifted. Al Green finally found balance. The path of faith, once rooted in pain, began to offer real peace. The spotlight dimmed. The rush of stardom faded. In its place came a slower life, where old wounds were no longer punished daily, but accepted as part of who he was. Phyllis Hyman. Phyllis Hyman. An elegant jazz siren who slowly shattered her own spirit. Once, her voice could still a room, thick, velvety, and emotionally devastating. She carried a rare depth, gliding between jazz and soul with a sophistication few could match. Her albums earned critical praise, she shared stages with legends, and her presence became a symbol of refinement in contemporary music. Under the spotlight, Phyllis appeared serene and in command, mastering every breath and every note. But behind that polish lived a woman under constant strain, quietly holding together fractures that had been forming for years. By 1980, just as her career reached a crucial peak, Phyllis began pushing herself into a spiral of exhaustion. New York, once a city of promise, started to feel like a maze with no exit. A brutal industry, compounded by gender and racial bias, weighed heavily on her, and the collapse of her marriage in 1983 deepened the wound. Instead of finding support, she retreated inward, slowly severing the connections that once anchored her. After a disappointing recording session that same year, she cut off nearly everyone close to her. The phone went unanswered. The door stayed shut. Familiar faces disappeared. Isolation became routine, fueled by a growing sense of failure. For years, some even believed she had vanished entirely. By 1987, the shift was stark. Nights stretched into reckless parties where she forced herself into crowds, numbing the pain. Alcohol flowed constantly, her words grew sharp, lashing out at others and herself. Each episode pushed people further away, thickening the loneliness already surrounding her. Entering the early 1990s, the pressure became unbearable. In 1991, Phyllis rejected every offer of musical collaboration. New opportunities weren't refused out of lack of talent, but as a form of self-punishment. With each closed door, she sank deeper into helplessness. Anxiety became relentless, her mental state visibly deteriorating. The consequences came slowly, but they were devastating. Industry relationships collapsed. Opportunities dried up. The voice that once mesmerized audiences was swallowed by silence. Years of self-destruction eroded her career, her spirit, and finally her life, ending tragically in 1995 with an overdose, leaving behind a legacy of brilliance and a cautionary tale of a soul undone from within. Halle Berry. Halle Berry, the cinema goddess who quietly wore her own body down in the pursuit of greatness. She entered Hollywood armed with striking beauty and relentless ambition, moving from modeling runways to television and finally to film, determined to claim space in an industry where women of color were often pushed aside. Early awards, critical praise, and bright stage lights made her a familiar name, a symbol of hard-won progress and a representative of a generation breaking through old barriers. But behind the glow, success was anything but smooth. Every win came with a silent cost, paid daily. In the late 1980s, still in her 20s, Halle threw herself into work at a breakneck pace. In 1989, after being diagnosed with diabetes, she didn't slow down to adjust, she pushed harder. Sleepless nights blurred together as scripts, auditions, and punishing beauty standards consumed her days. Her body fought back with dizziness on set, even collapsing mid-shoot, yet she refused to stop. That self-imposed rhythm became normal. By the early 1990s, Hollywood pressure intensified. Racial discrimination made opportunities uneven, and each failed audition carved away at her confidence. In 1991, frustration turned inward. She punished her body with hours-long runs, ignoring back and leg pain. Small injuries stacked up, rest was forbidden, and exhaustion tightened its grip. In 1993, her first marriage collapsed. Instead of healing, Halle buried the pain in more work. 3 to 4 hours of sleep became routine as projects chained together, days and nights bleeding into one. She convinced herself non-stop work was the only escape from emotional hurt. The mental strain soon became physical. Her diabetes worsened, her body finally sounding the alarm. Hospitalized for severe exhaustion, her career briefly stalled as roles slowed and momentum faded. Yet that brutal, self-eroding chapter forged an uncommon resilience. After 2 months of recovery, Halle Berry emerged clearer, tougher, and ready. What nearly broke her instead prepared her for the breakthrough that would force Hollywood to truly recognize her power. Ken Griffey Jr., a young baseball prodigy who pushed himself to the edge of danger. He burst into the baseball world like a rare phenomenon. Raw talent, natural instincts, and a name already heavy with legacy. As the son of a star, Griffey carried his father's shadow into every stadium. When he entered the MLB, he was instantly crowned the next-generation icon, crushed under towering expectations from family, media, and fans alike. His swing was electric, his confidence magnetic, and his rise came fast. Too fast. Behind the bright lights, Griffey Jr.'s growth was anything but smooth. The pressure to prove himself early stretched him thin. In 1987, at just 17, the weight became unbearable. Family arguments over discipline and expectations bottled up his teenage emotions until they exploded. In a reckless moment, Griffey Jr. overdosed on aspirin. He woke up in a hospital bed, confused, ashamed, and silent. The incident faded quickly, buried beneath relentless training and the grind of the game. By 1989, once he reached the MLB, the intensity multiplied. Griffey Jr. attacked practice with unusual aggression, batting and throwing until his hands split open and blood soaked into his gloves. Trainers warned him to rest. He refused. Every ounce of pain felt like proof that he belonged, that he could stand tall beside his father's legacy. Wrist swelling, shoulder pain, dislocations, he brushed them off as nothing. By age 20, the mental pressure began leaking into off-field risks. Griffey Jr. turned to mountain biking, racing down steep slopes at reckless speeds. No protection, no brakes, no fear. Crashes became routine. The adrenaline numbed his anxiety, if only briefly. Minor injuries piled up, forcing short absences and unstable conditioning. On quiet days away from the field, sadness crept in. Yet that self-destructive chapter forged an unbreakable edge. Griffey Jr. survived the pressure that nearly broke him. When he finally exploded onto the game's biggest stage, he shattered home run records and became an American baseball icon, carrying the invisible scars of a childhood cut short and a young legend forced to grow up far too fast. Tamar Braxton. Tamar Braxton is unmistakable in American entertainment, a powerhouse voice, an explosive personality, and a reality TV presence defined by fearless honesty and fiery clashes. She didn't rise on music alone. She dominated television, especially through her family's hit show, becoming known early on as the bold Braxton who spoke her mind and lived out loud beneath a famous last name. But around 2015, as the lights stayed on and the cameras never left, a darker spiral quietly formed. Tamar didn't torture herself with blades or public meltdowns. She chose something subtler and more relentless: social media. Her image. Her words. She chipped away at herself daily. In 2016, troubling posts appeared and vanished as quickly as her moods. Time and again she labeled herself a failure, then erased the evidence. The public reacted. The media dissected. The pressure bounced back harder. By 2017, her marriage collapsed, not privately, but on display. Comparisons to her more famous sister became constant. Family turned into weight. Fame into burden. Tamar dove into online battles, and by 2018 she was fighting fans relentlessly. Every reply was a metal cut. Every argument stole another night of sleep. She once stayed awake for 3 days straight, battling anti-fans. Exhaustion piled up. Her spirit thinned. Her body began to break. By 2020, Tamar hit bottom. She shut everyone out, ignored family, avoided those closest to her. Years of bottled pressure erupted dangerously in an unstable moment, a pill overdose. She was saved in time, followed by hospitalizations and therapy. Her TV career stalled. Seasons paused. Her public image dimmed. Yet in that lowest place, Tamar finally turned inward. Therapy became routine. Life slowed. The mental wounds didn't disappear overnight, but they were named, faced, and slowly soothed. Years of self-inflicted damage left a heavy toll, but they also carved a narrow path toward stability. One quiet step at a time. Fantasia Barrino. Fantasia Barrino, the American Idol powerhouse who spent years punishing herself through toxic love. Born into poverty and armed with an explosive, unmistakable voice, Fantasia rose fast, conquering television audiences, charting records, and even commanding Broadway stages. Her music carried raw emotion, the sound of survival and strength, and from the outside, her story looked like a perfect rags-to-riches miracle, fame arriving hard and fast, glory shining bright. But behind the spotlight, her path was never paved with roses. Early success brought crushing pressure, non-stop obligations, and a quiet, growing self-doubt that set the stage for darker years. From 2008 to 2015, still very young and carrying too many roles at once, Fantasia slipped into a silent cycle of mental self-torture. She battled debt after her debut album Single Mom, while unhealed memories of childhood abuse resurfaced. In that fragile state, Fantasia was drawn into toxic relationships, believing, deep down, that pain was all she deserved. By 2009, one relationship became a constant source of erosion, control, tension, emotional and physical harm repeating until her sense of safety and self-respect wore away. Family pressure mounted, guilt piled higher, and Fantasia publicly blamed herself for every failed relationship, even when her partner was violent and unfaithful. She labeled herself weak, shaped by poverty, forever owing the world something. In 2010, after a devastating family conflict, exhausted and emotionally empty, she overdosed on aspirin and sleeping pills. Fantasia woke up in a hospital bed, her body broken, her spirit drained. The news spread quickly, a stark warning of years of instability boiling over. Yet even then, she didn't stop. Instead, Fantasia punished herself through relentless work. By 2013, her health was visibly declining, but she forced herself onto the stage, treating exhaustion as penance for mistakes she believed she'd made. Eventually, her once proud voice rebelled. She lost it temporarily for nearly half a year, shows were canceled, and the silence was deafening. Her relationships, especially with her daughter, grew strained as Fantasia withdrew further into herself. That painful chain of events finally forced her to slow down. Years later, she turned to writing her autobiography, not to celebrate fame, but to confront the pain, guilt, and long habit of self-punishment head-on. That honesty became the doorway to healing. Fantasia began to stabilize, learning how to exist without hurting herself to survive. She returned with a new mindset, more cautious, more grounded, and finally, kinder to the woman behind the voice. Cheslie Kryst. Cheslie Kryst. The picture-perfect Miss America who quietly carried an unbearable weight. To the world, she was unstoppable, a woman who seemed to have everything perfectly under control. A stunning beauty queen, a trained attorney, and a polished television correspondent, Cheslie embodied success. Her radiant face, flawless smile, and spotless resume projected confidence, strength, and endless momentum. From the pageant stage to the courtroom and then into the media spotlight, her rise was swift and dazzling. Everything about her life appeared disciplined, intentional, and held to the highest standard. But behind the polish, perfection came at a devastating cost. After 2019, the crown she once wore proudly became a crushing burden. Cheslie moved to New York City, leaving behind her family and the comfort of familiar support. The city of endless ambition demanded more, and she gave it everything. Her days stretched to 18 exhausting hours. Television appearances, legal work, activism, and relentless beauty standards collided, forcing her to mask deep fatigue with a practiced smile. Her body warned her. Her spirit weakened. Yet rest felt forbidden. Over time, self-pressure turned into routine, as if burnout were simply the price of being exceptional. By 2020, the strain only intensified. As the world shut down during COVID, Chesley closed herself off emotionally. Friends still saw her glowing exterior, but inside her private journals told a far darker story, pages filled with self-blame, guilt, and the belief that she was never good enough, never strong enough, never truly deserving of the image she had created. She lived lavishly on the surface while quietly refusing help, punishing herself through silence. Depression tightened its grip as she endured alone, convinced vulnerability was failure. By 2021, years of internal pressure spilled into dangerous behavior. Chesley began seeking solitude in extreme adventures, climbing mountains unprepared, venturing into risky terrain with little more than hiking poles and a bottle of water. Slips, falls, even plunges down cliffs failed to stop her. Risk became a way to feel something, to reclaim control amid sleepless nights and mental collapse. The toll was unmistakable: declining work performance, fractured relationships, and endless exhaustion. Outwardly, she still shined. Inwardly, she was unraveling, trapped by silence and an unforgiving pursuit of perfection. Years of self-imposed expectations quietly paved the road to tragedy. In 2022, Chesley Christ's life ended from a great height, bringing to a close a journey that looked like the pinnacle of success but felt, to her, painfully hollow. She left behind a brief will that spoke volumes about the suffering she had hidden for so long. These stories are not told to judge or sensationalize loss. They are shared to confront a truth rarely spoken. What do you feel after looking beyond the glamour and into the reality behind it? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. Here, we don't just celebrate the spotlight, we expose the shadows behind it.